Hi, everybody, and welcome to another WinPeer's weekly webinar. See, we've got some people just coming in a little late here today. My name is Ben Cutler, and I'm one of our solutions specialists here at WinPeer. Appreciate everyone joining. I'll be your host today, and we're going to keep it fairly casual. Most people are working from home. Obviously, worldwide, crises. I hope everyone is doing well. You and your families. Again, appreciate you joining today. We're going to look at company matching, essentially matching data sets containing company data. So just to get started here, in the name of keeping it casual, I just found this before the webinar. I hope everybody is at home, staying safe, washing your hands several times a day. Obviously important. I got a kick out of that image. But yeah, we're going to jump into a demonstration. We're going to keep it casual. We're going to skip the slides today. Again, for those of you just joining, my name is Ben Cutler. I'm one of our solution specialists here with WinPeer. I'll be your host today. Anyone who did register for this webinar will receive an email from me following this webinar. That email will include a link to the recording, also a link to my online calendar if you'd like to schedule a one-on-one or a meeting with me. That email will include some additional information. And again, today it's a casual webinar. I'm going to be taking real-time questions throughout the webinar, and I do want to emphasize that there's a question box on the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to submit questions along the way. If we can keep it interactive, I think that'll be more useful for everyone. If you can find a way to raise your hand, I'd be happy to try to unmute you so you can ask your question verbally. So just unmuting you essentially for the question itself. So you can either type your question in, or if you can find a way to raise your hand, there is one on the GoToWebinar control panel. As long as you have reliable audio, I'd be happy to unmute you so you can ask your question verbally. Keep in mind, visit winpeer.com for more information, or you can email us to sales@winpeer.com. But again, I can see we've got some people joining a little late here, so just kind of slowly getting into this. Really appreciate everyone joining. Again, obviously a lot going on in the world today. A lot of different priorities. We've seen a lot of people working from home and working with data right now. Obviously, you get in your home environment, you don't have the same tools that you did in the work in the office setting. Feel free to reach out if you need some help. We're always happy to help. But appreciate you joining. Hopefully this is helpful for everyone on the call. Appreciate your interest, your consideration. Again, want to emphasize this is open for live questions along the way. So feel free to submit questions through the question box. I'll try to keep my eye on that and find a good time to pause and take those questions. Or if you want to raise your hand virtually and you have reliable audio, I'd be happy to open it up to take those questions verbally as well. So you should all see my screen at this point. Let me just do a quick check. Great. So for those of you who are new to these webinars, to WinPeer, WinPeer was founded in 2003. We have a variety of different data quality solutions. What we're looking at today is our software Clean and Match Enterprise. It's our flagship edition. This is award-winning software worldwide. And we have a variety of different solutions available for budgets of just about any size. The software is very plug and play. You don't need any real special skills or any kind of in-depth training. We do have a free trial available, and it only takes about 2 minutes to download and 2 minutes to install. So again, it's winpeer.com. If you don't already have the software installed, feel free to request a trial version of the software that way. It's very plug and play. You can get started very quickly working with some of your data. So the agenda today, we're going to start with a quick mention of some of the problems that we help to solve, just to put this in context. We're going to walk through, maybe a 3 to 5 minute, just a quick walkthrough of the software, of the basic workflow, so that we're all starting on the same page. And then we're going to look at 2 examples of company data matching. So one example that's very, very simple, and one example that isn't so simple, right? It's more complex. So today it's going to be very visual, hopefully very interactive. Again, feel free to submit those questions, raise your hand if you want to chime in verbally. Happy to take those questions. So the types of problems that we solve, deduplication, it's a big one, it's very common, data quality, data integration, data migration, help with master data management, merge purge, single customer view, single supplier view, single product view, single source of truth, 360 customer view, 360 supplier view, data prep, data cleansing, data normalization, address verification, address capture or real-time address verification, postal certification, email verification, and a lot more. So hopefully that puts this in a little more context. We're going to start with the quick overview of the software, and then we're going to get into the examples today. So we're going to jump right into the demonstration. Again, we're going to keep it casual. So I hope you ask questions along the way. So once you've installed the software, and again, it's 2 minutes to download, 2 minutes to install. It's very plug and play. Everything is right out of the box for the most part. Very few exceptions to that. You're going to start here, which is kind of the home screen, and you can see on my screen here some data and just a bit of orientation. Again, a quick walkthrough before we jump into the examples of the cleansing and the matching and stuff like that. So the quick overview, some of the things that you need to know down here in the lower left, this is where you're going to find your primary workflow, right? So the primary workflow is data, clean, and match, right? And each of those steps have some other steps within them. We also have the verify tab here and the automation tab that's only available in the Enterprise Edition. Verify you should see in all editions, and we currently only have that available for license in the Enterprise Edition, but we're going to be rolling it out to other editions as well. Feel free to reach out with any questions on that. But I'm not going to go over much today, the verify or the automation, but feel free to ask questions if you have any. Today we're going to focus on data, clean, and match. That's your primary workflow, right? So we can navigate around the workflow with these tabs here. Your secondary workflow is above that in the upper left here. So project, import, and export. That's on the data step. So when you're at the data step here, primarily what you're going to be doing is importing data. And if we look over to the right, you can see we can do that from a variety of different sources, right? So popular sources are those that you see below, or you can import from a variety of different file types, a variety of different database sources, and a couple of different CRMs, right? So you can import data from a variety of different sources. You can mix and match. There's quite a bit of flexibility that way. So that's the data step. There's not much learning there. It's really just importing data. You can also create projects. You can export data, but we're going to focus on your most common use at the data step, which is really just import. We've already done that. We'll take a look at how to do that later. Let's move on to the clean step. Again, this is just a high-level overview so that we're all on the same page. We're going to have some people joining this webinar today or watching this webinar in the future that they're seeing the software for the first time. So we're going to take just a few minutes just for a general orientation here. From the clean step, we've got essentially 4 windows, 2 on the left and 2 on the right. The two on the left are for data preview, right? So you can ignore that for now. The two on the right are more interactive. The one down below, this is for data quality profile, right? So if you're working with lots of data, and typically we are, and if you want to better understand the content, the structure, the quality of the data quality profiling tool is going to be really, really useful for you. We'll take a look at this in more detail, through some of the examples here. But this is a data quality profiling tool. What I'm going to say about it now is essentially you can go source by source, column by column, and metric by metric. What that means is, as I flip between the two different sources here, the statistics are changing. So it's source by source, you're seeing the statistics. And then column by column, so name column, address column, and then metrics up top. So you can see we have one record with dots in the address column, right? There's a lot more there, and we'll look at that hopefully more in detail later, right? This can be very useful. You can also skip it if you want to. You don't have to do any data quality profile. If you already understand your data and you want to kind of get right to the point, feel free to skip it. But it is there, it is very useful, especially if you're working with a lot of data and you want to better understand some of those issues. Up top here, this is where we do the cleansing, the normalization, the standardization, the transformation, right? So same thing here is we went source by source and column by column and metric by metric. Up top, again, we can go source by source. The columns are the same, so you're not going to see any immediate changes there. And column by column and function by function, right? So a variety of different ways to cleanse, normalize, and standardize the data. And as I scroll over the tabs up top here, you can see the explanation for what can be done in that tab of cleansing options and a link to that section of the help file. And that help file is, it's pretty useful. There's some good examples, good explanations, so that should be helpful for you as well. So again, I'm not going to go into great detail into all of this right now, but again, this is where we'll do the cleansing, the standardization, normalization, transformation, a variety of different functions available to you, right? Next step here is matching, right? We're going to take a quick look at this before we actually look at the examples, right? So from the match step, in the upper left here, again, that secondary workflow, we've got match configuration, matched results, and a report, a match report here. So in terms of the overview, we're just going to take it as far as the configuration, right? We'll come back to results once we actually get into an example. From the configuration step, it's very simple for beginners. It's 3 steps, and it's very, very simple. It doesn't take much learning. If you look here to the right, you can see in blue lettering, step 1, step 2, and step 3. So step 1, select your tables. Very simple. Step 2, primarily what you're doing here is selecting columns for matching. So you can just double click on the columns on the left. These are fixed columns, you might say. So this is where you can do the clicking. These you can actually make some changes to if you need to remap fields. But double click here, and you can add it to step 3, which is essentially telling the system which columns we want to use to do the matching, right? So if we're matching on company data or people data, we're probably going to use a name, right? A company name or a person name or contact name. And so, very quickly and easily in 3 steps, we're telling the system we want to do some fuzzy matching. That's using our best-in-class proprietary fuzzy matching algorithm. It's probably the most powerful tool you'll find in the software. And by default, we're going to do it at 90% or a level of 90, which is essentially a 90% level of similarity. And everything is pretty much set up to go. And we can start matching and very quickly get some results, right? So we're not going to actually take that next step. That's your high-level overview. Like I promised, 3 to 5 minutes, just so that we're all starting from the same page. Import data, you can look over here. Import data, the clean step, you can profile the data to better understand what you're working with. Does the company name column contain company names, or does it contain phone numbers and things like that? Does the address column contain address values, or does it contain email addresses, or phone numbers and contact names, things like that? So again, profiling to better understand the quality of the data, what you're working with. Cleansing to clean it up for multiple purposes. Could just be data prep to load into some target system, or it could be data prep to get better match results, right? So at that clean step, you can do the profiling and you can do the cleansing. And then a match step where you're essentially telling the system how you want to do the matching, which sources you want to match and how you want to do the matching, which columns you want to use for the matching, right? So pretty straightforward, right? Hopefully we're all on the same page. Let me do a quick check here, see if we have any questions coming in thus far. Oh, and by the way here, if we do run over the half-an-hour mark, I'm happy to, especially if we have questions. I've got a couple of different examples, so we may or may not get through the examples, in the first 30 minutes. If we run over, there's no problem at all, especially if we have questions coming in. Take a quick look here. Okay, no questions thus far, so we can keep moving. Let's jump back to the data step here. We've imported data from two different sources, and you may have two sources, you may have a single source, you may have dozens of sources. We have different versions to accommodate for different needs. But this is, we've for this example, we're just using two sources and just a few columns of data to make it very visible, very very easy to understand, right? Where are those differences? What we're doing to resolve those differences, how we're solving those problems ultimately. So just two sources and just a single record in each source. And remember, this is a simple example for company matching, right? When we talk about company matching, we looked at people matching or contact matching 2 weeks ago. And contact matching and company matching are not incredibly different, right? We typically have some kind of name, and we typically have some kind of like contact information or mailing information, right? We may have a phone number, we may have an email address, we may have a mailing address, shipping address, billing address, things like that. We may have some sort of unique ID with people information. It could be a national ID number, it could be a insurance number, it could be there's so many different possibilities there. But we're with these two sets of data, there are a lot of similarities, right? It's typically a name and typically some kind of some other attributes, essentially to get in touch with that individual or with that company if need be, right? We also work with product data, and that's going to be very, very different. Asset data, that's going to be very, very different, right? So each type of data has its own domain, really, which is why we're doing this kind of week by week. But when we look at this company data, you can see a lot of similarities to looking at people data, right? Essentially a name, address, maybe a phone number, maybe some kind of web contact information, maybe some kind of unique ID, like a VAT number. And between these two examples, the data is really similar. Again, this is a simple example. If we're going to do some matching, on this side, the name is Winpeer. On this side, it's Winpeer Ltd, right? And that's a very common example with companies, right? You have these company, legal entities attached with their company name, LLC, Inc., Corp., Incorporated, and all of the different variations, and that can make it difficult to do matching. Well, that's something like that is going to be very simple with the software, and we're going to take a look at that in a minute, right? So again, this is a simple example. If we look at the address here, we've got our headquarters address out of the UK, and on this side, it's essentially, it's describing the same location, right? Again, when we talk about data and why it doesn't match, we've got two fundamental problems. One is that data is always a description, and that description is likely to vary. And the other is that, business systems and applications, their computers are very fast, but they're also very dumb. They're looking for zeros and ones, right? So, when we look at like this name, for example, Winpeer versus Winpeer Ltd, a lot of the times the system is going to treat that as two different companies because, they're not an exact match, right? So for this kind of stuff, it's very simple. We don't necessarily need to profile the data. We don't need to do a lot of cleaning of the data. We can just move right to matching. The next example is going to be a little bit more complex. But again, similar addresses, essentially describing the same location, country data, describing the same location. But when you've got people and company data that really are describing different locations, right, or different ways of contacting this company or this individual, right? We all change phone numbers, we change addresses, we change places of employment, we change email addresses. Not all sources of data have those unique identifiers like, social security numbers, national ID numbers, insurance numbers, things like that. So, again, when kind of matching or linking data from different sources, there's a lot of different possibilities. The first problem is that we're dealing with descriptions that are always going to be different. Other problems include the fact that, the data is not going to be the same. We don't have the same pieces of information, right? They could be describing different locations and different ways of contacting these individuals. You think about companies, especially global companies, you've got, different areas of business working, in different parts of the world, right? With different, mailing addresses, different phone numbers, different email addresses, things like that. So a lot of possibilities there in terms of why the data won't match. Again, this is a very simple example. So in this case, country data is describing the same location. It's just two different ways of describing it. So it's a fairly simple challenge, right? If we look at the phone number, essentially we've got the same phone number, just two different ways of writing that phone number, one with dashes, one with dots. So this is simple stuff, right? Website here, and the website is just a little bit different here. You plug that into a browser and, you get to the same website either way. But when we talk about like business applications, most business applications are going to treat those as two separate web addresses, right? Because they don't match exactly. So this is a real simple example. And, for this example, I'm not going to touch the clean step. I don't really need to do anything here. Maybe I will later, but we can move right to matching. Something like this, we can easily handle with fuzzy matching. Something like the differences here in the address, we can easily handle with fuzzy matching, right? This is simple. And again, I mentioned that, our best-in-class fuzzy match algorithm is probably the most powerful tool that you'll find within the software. This is the most difficult problem that we're solving. We've got, you look at, business environments today, and again, especially these global organizations, we've got so much silo data and disparate, business applications and data systems and things like that, these areas of business are working with different sets of information at the end of the day, right? And so if you can see it all in kind of a single source, and bring all of this information together, what can you really accomplish? I mean, it's really limitless. Quick anecdote, to put this into perspective, you think about information, you think about your life, right? And you as an individual, and different sources of information about you as an individual. What does, for example, your employer know about you, right? That's a very kind of exclusive set of information that your employer has about you. But then compare that to what your doctor knows about you, right? A completely different set of information, right? And compare that to what your internet service provider knows about you. And if you're married, what your spouse knows about you, right? And you think about that in the same world that data exists, there's so many different sources of information, and that information exists in different ways, in different systems, with different identifiers and different descriptions, and some of it's historical and some of it's more accurate, right? And if there's a way to link all of this data together, how much information do you really have on a person, right? Maybe, to some of you, this is already obvious, but there is so much power in being able to link information, right? And that's what we're doing here. So hopefully that kind of puts things in context. So again, something like this is, it can be very simple, right? Step one, choose your sources. Step two, choose your columns. I've done that. I've told it to match on name. And we can do some quick matching here. and we're going to see some really, fast and very accurate results here, right? It ignores the noise and it trains itself to focus on the signal. And it says, look, these two values are very similar, right? And I can do the same thing. I can do the same thing with address, for example, and match that way, right? If it's similar enough, we'll see it as a match, right? Again, this is a simple example. There's so many different possibilities about why data won't match, right? And some of the, there's so many different examples of ways that you might need to cleanse and normalize the data to get better match results, right? So we're starting with simple stuff. Same thing with phone number. If I want to go ahead and just run a simple fuzzy match here on a phone number, right? Very, very effective. Fuzzy matching is very, very effective. But again, it's not the only way to match data, right? When we look at clean, again, better understanding the data and cleansing, normalizing, standardizing the data to make it more matchable, right? I'm going to give you some examples that way. Also from match configuration, right? This is very simple for beginners. Select your sources, choose a column to match on, click start. But there's a lot more that we can do here. For more advanced users, we can add groups and we can add conditions. We can, set each condition up to work with different match algorithms. We can adjust the fuzzy level. We can, set up the way that, we want the system to handle null or blank fields. We've got a knowledge-based library, which is customizable at the enterprise level. And you can also select, field by field or column by column, a weight in groups. So for more advanced users, we've got all of the tools that you need for more, more advanced users and more complex data matching or linkage scenarios. We've got all the tools that you need to be able to do this very quickly, very easily, and very accurately, right? So let's go ahead and, let me take a quick look here. I see I've got at least one question coming in here. So the question is, and so thank you, Larry. The question is, where do you draw the line between choosing to rely on fuzzy matching and when you should conduct some data cleaning first? What factors are involved in making this choice? So Larry, I'm gonna give you a response, and thank you for the question. I appreciate it. And if anybody has questions, feel free to submit. We've got a pause here, so this is a good time. There isn't a quick or a silver bullet answer to this question, but I'm going to try to give you a quick response that'll be useful for you. So where do you draw the line between choosing to rely on fuzzy matching and when you should start to conduct some data cleansing first? What factors are involved in making this choice? So first thing here, Larry, what I would do before I do any cleansing, again, best practice, use the profiler to better understand the data, source by source, column by column, especially focusing on some of those key columns, especially those columns that you're going to use for matching. If you've got a phone number and a name field, you want to know that. You want to do some cleansing there. But, and then, again, do some cleansing and standardization. But what I would typically do before I put time into the profiling, the data understanding and the cleansing, which can be time consuming. Before I do that, I would spend some time running a few iterations with just the matching, right? I would typically start that way because you don't know what you don't know. And again, your scenario may be very simple, like we're seeing here, but it also may be much more complex, right? And if it's simple, we don't necessarily need to put a lot of time into the data understanding or to the cleansing and the standardization. We can start with some simple matching. And by matching, we can also learn about things we might be missing, right? And using the results to do that, looking at the results, seeing, and actually, Larry, quick shout out, we did this yesterday, right? We started by matching and we looked at the results and found more information that we could use to better understand, where the data will match, where it won't match, some of the things that we need to do to cleanse the data or normalize the data to get better match results. So again, you always need to kind of time box yourself, when, when dealing with data, right? Same thing with data matching. My recommendation, long story short, start by running a few iterations with matching. Look at it from a few different angles. Review the results, right? It could be a simple scenario. It just requires, some tweaking to the way that you're doing the matching. But, in reviewing the results, you may find that, you're actually missing out on quite a few opportunities. You're seeing false positives or, vice versa. And you're likely to pick up on some opportunities, learn more about the data that way. You can go back to the profiling, do a little bit of work there, do a little bit of work in the cleansing and standardization, and build upon those match rules, right? But again, most importantly is that you time box yourself, right? There's no silver bullet to data matching. It's a great question. Let me see if I've got any other questions coming in here. No, okay. So let's go ahead and let's move on to the more complex examples. So again, we're at the half an hour here, but I'm going to run over. If you guys are, if you can't stay with us, appreciate you joining. But if you want to hang out with us, another 15 or 20 minutes maybe, we can work through this next example. Any other questions that might come up? So import files again. So this is where you're going to actually see the import. So choose the location, choose, in this case, it's Excel, so we're choosing a worksheet. If you're pulling in from SQL, for example, you'll choose your tables, your views, but it's all pretty simple stuff. It's all out of the box. If you have any questions, feel free to let us know. So we're going to bring in two other examples here, each that have a few other records. And in these scenarios, this is more complex because, if you look closely at the data, you can see we've got a lot of missing data, right? And here where we have a contact name, for example, we've got a contact email, right? And here we've got, one URL, and here we do have URLs. So that could even be more complex, perhaps. Here we've got, one way of describing the country. Here we've got multiple ways of describing the country, right? So again, address is here, no address is here, right? So we've got a lot less information to work with, and the information that we have is much less consistent, right? And if you look at, the company names, we've got quite a few differences here. I mean, there are some similarities. I mean, it's ultimately, it's the same organization, ExxonMobil, but then here, like we've got Mobil, which is it's just another brand of ExxonMobil, right? When we talk about company data, you're not always dealing with the same company name, right? Same with people where we have nicknames, and we change our last names and things like that. And then we've got, sometimes partial names and, initials to describe our names and things like that, missing names, all those other common issues. With companies, again, we've got a lot of those same issues, and we've got the legal entity types, which are the Inc., the Corp, the, LLC, all of that, the noise associated with the company name. But beyond that, we've got a lot of other, potential complications. Like in this one, if you look up a large global organization like ExxonMobil, and you're, selling into this organization or you're buying from this organization, and, you're trying to consolidate and link this information from different parts of your organization, you're going to see this company name being represented in so many different ways. You're going to have their headquarters, you're going to have the, described as a corporation, you're going to have, their business division for sales and service, you're going to have their business division for, international, and, their US division and things like that. But then on top of that, you're likely to have different brands associated with the same company, mergers and acquisitions and things like that. So, and then of course you're going to have, so many different phone numbers and, potentially different, websites and, tens or thousands or, tens of thousands of contacts associated with those companies. So, again, dealing with company information as compared to people information might be in some ways more difficult, but again, similar challenge in that we're dealing with a lot of the same type of information. So again, you can see some of the differences here. And again, this is a more complex example. I've seen much more complex examples than what we see here today. But this is a good example for the webinar today. So I'm going to try to work through this here pretty quickly. And, you know, again, we can start with just some simple fuzzy matching, right? You know, when I'm working with data for the first time and I'm doing data matching, you know, be it company data or people data or address data or asset data, transaction data, there's so many different types. You know, I'm typically not going to start by trying to understand it this way. I'll come back to that, right? I'll see what I need to know later. You know, I'll do a quick eyeball maybe of the different columns that I have in the data set, and you know, a quick eyeball of the first few records that I see here on the screen to see what, you know, kind of what I'm dealing with there. But I'm typically not going to jump, you know, as a first step, I'm not going to jump into, you know, trying to understand the data at a very high level or trying to clean it just yet. I'm typically going to start with matching to see if I'm dealing with something that is going to be fairly simple, and sometimes it is, or if it's going to take some more work, right? So let's start with matching. Again, back to configuration, right? Up top here, step 1, step 2, step 3, pretty simple stuff. And step 2, select columns to match. And we're going to start just with the name, right? I added it twice here. Let's get rid of it. Now, something to know, I've started here by using a fuzzy level by 90. And, again, there's a lot of different ways to do this. There's a lot of kind of dials and levers and things like this in terms of the way that we set up the match algorithms, right? 90 is good, especially if you're not just working with a single column of data. If it is just a single column of data that you're using to do the matching, 90 might be, in a lot of cases, especially if it's a large data set, it might be too loose. You know, it might not be strong enough. For the type of matching that you're looking to do. You're likely to see a lot of false positives that way. And I point this out because this is actually, this is useful for this example, right? So in this case, again, that level is, it's a percentage of similarity essentially, right? And if I tell the system to do this at a 95, which is more likely what I would use if I'm just working with a single column of data for the matching, if I do it at 95, I'm not going to see all of my matches, right? We've got a couple of different ways of viewing the data here, where actually it's being grouped based on some of these other similarities, and we're not seeing all of the matches. So do a quick record count here, and we've got 6 in terms of the number of records that we found matching. And at import here, we've got 5 on this side and 6 on this side, so that's 11. So back to match results, and we've got 6. So we're missing 5 records if we do this at a 95% similarity, right? And you can see here, it's also at 95% similarity, it's also being grouped into 2 different groups here because, these look pretty similar and these look pretty similar. And that can be really useful, but, there's also different ways to do this and some other things that, if you need this grouped into different divisions, that can be really useful too. So different scenarios there in terms of your requirements. But so at 95, we missed about half of the number of records, even though, they're pretty much all the same. But again, those company names are very, very different, right? Let's try it at 90 and see how we do, right? This, the fuzzy matching here, this is the most powerful tool in the software. So we did a lot better at 90. Now, again, with a larger data set and just a single column for matching, 90 might be too loose. But in this scenario, it did really well. It pulled all of this together, regardless of, all of these differences in spellings and spacing and extra characters, extra words, things like that. It pulled all of it together and it says, hey, look, this is a group of matching records. So we found 10 of the 11. Which one did we miss? We missed the one that was just mobile because it's so different, right? It doesn't meet the criteria. It doesn't meet the threshold at 90%, right? And you're often going to find that. That's one of the things that makes this scenario more difficult, right? And then again, looking at the data this way, we can learn more about different ways that we can match it. We can see that we're not going to be able to match on phone number. We can see that if we want to match on country, well, we probably need to do some standardization there. We can see that we're not going to be able to match on addresses because it's, there's just so many different locations here. We can also see that we have, a URL here, and we have names, and we have email addresses, and there are some similarities in all of this, right? And so if we do some cleanup here, we can get better match results, right? Because this matches this, right? And if we look at this more in depth, this matches this, right? So if we do some cleansing, right, on this information, we can make it more matchable, right? Same with this here, but this is not going to help us, and this is not going to help us, right? You know, not even if we try working with states. Maybe we can group some of this just by Texas, right? But the addresses, these are all different locations, so we can't do any kind of grouping that way, right? Well, you know, other things that we can do, you know, mobile does match to, you know, to some of this. So if we're to, you know, maybe parse this out, we could match mobile to mobile, maybe, but I'm going to give you a better solution, right? And again, this is just one example. There's so many different examples in terms of, you know, the different types of data that you're dealing with, the different types of opportunities, and the different types of challenges. We can't cover it all in a single WebEx here. And we're just really just touching the tip of the iceberg here. So again, let's come back to clean here. And, you know, here we've got very consistently a URL. Here we've got very consistently a name. Here we've got very consistently a URL, which is the domain part of the email. And we've got name information over here, right? So this can be really useful for us. And we've got some quick and very powerful tools to work with that scenario. So here we're going to split emails, and I'll show you what that looks like here. We're going to split, right? This is again the cleansing. So contact email, right? On the first source here, contact email. We're going to split on the email. And what we're splitting is the email, right? So here, right out of the box, we can split people names, addresses. You know, happy to get into these examples if we have some questions there. But in this example, we're going to split an email address, right? It's just, you know, it's point and click. It's copy and paste. It's very simple to use. Data matching in itself is a science, right? But the science of, you know, learning how to use the software is very simple. Usually doesn't take more than a few hours. And so here I've split the email address, and you can see how I did that. Now, names here are going to be easier to match against names here, right? And the domain here is going to be easier to match against the domain here, right? So quick solution. If I know how to match the data, then I can go back and do some quick, you know, cleansing, preparation, make a few quick changes here, and my work is really done for me, right? So let's do this real quickly and easily here. I'm going to set it up with multiple groups, which just tells the system to look for essentially multiple thresholds, right? Multiple sets of criteria, separate sets of criteria, separate sets of minimum levels of similarity. So in this first one, we're looking for minimum level of similarity based on the name. In the second one here, we're going to look for minimum levels of similarity based on the URL. And on this third one, we're going to look for minimum levels of similarity based on the name, right? Do some matching here, and look at that. Look at our count. We found the 11 that we're looking for, right? These match, right? We were able to pull it all together this way. Now, quick note here. Matching contact names and companies at the same time on the same project may not always work for you. This is just a quick example to give you some ideas about some of the ways that you can solve these challenges and to use the tool to do so. But note that people and companies are different, right? They're different entities, right? If you try to match essentially different entities into the same group, it's not always going to work that way, because you're going to find, you know, for example, you're going to find Thomas Randy working at, you know, the same name, but a different person working at multiple different organizations. And so you might end up seeing multiple different companies being grouped together. So just a quick note of caution, when doing that. Again, feel free to raise your hand, ask a question. Happy to unmute anyone that might want to ask any verbal questions. Submit any questions that you might have, or again, after this webinar, you'll receive a link to my online calendar. If you'd like to have a better conversation, if you want to reply to the email with questions, that's fine too. I've been doing this for a while, so I've seen pretty much everything there is to see. So we found our matching records here. We worked through that more complex example very quickly. Again, all of this in about 45 minutes. So just want to open it up, stop it here, kind of a clean stop, about 45 minutes into this webinar. Again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to submit those. But, I know, there's so much going on in the world today, a lot of uncertainty. Hopefully everybody's washing their hands, staying at home, staying safe, staying healthy. Really appreciate time, your interest, your consideration. Anyone that wants to drop off, feel free. I see at least one question coming in, so I'm going to answer that. But again, really appreciate everyone joining. Hopefully this was useful. And, just a quick, note before I take these questions. We appreciate your interest. Hope you'll get in touch if you have any questions. And hope you have a great rest of your week for anyone that might drop off here. Let's take a look at the questions coming in. Yeah, not a question, just a comment. So Matthew, you're welcome. Thank you for joining. I hope this was helpful. Yeah, again, feel free to get in touch, put some, time in the calendar. You might be an existing client that just needs some extra, help with a project. You might be somebody looking at the software and you've got a few questions. We're happy to help. Contact me directly or contact us at sales@winpeer.com. A lot of this information you can find on the website. If you're someone who hasn't yet purchased the software, you can actually purchase either our small business or our business pro edition right there on the website. It's quick, it's simple. Make sure to add a note that you saw this webinar, so I get credit for that. But again, really appreciate everyone joining. I don't see any other questions here today, so thank you all for joining. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a great rest of your week.